Welcome to today's Explainer. We're diving straight into a truly fascinating and honestly wild period of history today, the rise and fall of the Zengid Dynasty. If you've ever been curious about the massive geopolitical shifts of the 12th and 13th centuries, this is absolutely crucial stuff. Think of the Zengids as the essential, missing link bridge between those chaotic early Crusader conflicts and the highly famous era of Saladin. Today, we're going to pull apart this story and figure out exactly how this empire was built, how it fractured from the inside out, and how it was ultimately wiped from the map completely.
We're talking about a powerhouse 95-year dynasty here. For a time, they were the formidable wall that presented a united front against the Crusaders. But history loves a bit of irony, doesn't it? Because in the end, their grip on power wasn't dismantled by their sworn enemies. It was taken apart by their very own top general, and the remaining pieces of their empire were quite literally erased by the Mongols. It's a roller coaster of incredible peaks and really sudden, dramatic valleys.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1, the Zengid Dynasty Origins, Building an Empire.
So who exactly were the Zengids? Well, they were a Muslim Turkic dynasty. The guy who started it all, and the guy who gave the dynasty its name, was a leader named Zengi. Under him, they carved out a massive, powerful domain stretching across northern Iraq, a region historically known as Al Jazeera, and well into Syria. Now you have to remember, in this time period, that is prime real estate. Holding that territory gave them massive, undeniable influence over basically all the politics and trade in the entire region.
Let's put this into perspective and look at the timeline. The whole story kicks off in 1127. That's when the dynasty is officially founded. Just 19 years later, in 1146, we hit a massive turning point. Zengi dies. From that moment, the dynasty manages to survive until its absolute end in 1222. So we're looking at a 95-year window in total. But we really need to zoom in on that critical middle date right there, 1146.
Which brings us to Section 2, a dynasty divided, the sons take over.
You know how this usually goes, right? A larger-than-life founder dies, and almost immediately, the political fragmentation begins. When Zengi died in 1146, his beautifully unified state was just cleanly severed right down the middle. Syria was handed over to his son Nur-ad-Din, who would rule from 1146 all the way to 1174. Meanwhile, the northern Iraq territory, Al Jazeera, went to another son, Saif al-Din Ghazi I. His reign was much shorter, just a quick 3 years until 1149. But the damage was done. The united Zengid front was now basically two parallel, separate states.
Now, over in Syria, Nur-ad-Din was not sitting idle. He pushed a seriously aggressive expansionist policy. First up, in 1154, he successfully annexed Damascus. Then, by 1168, his forces swept south and actually subjugated Egypt. By cobbling these massive territories together, he achieved his ultimate goal, presenting a broad, incredibly competent Muslim front to hold back the Crusaders. But here's the catch. To pull off massive territorial grabs like Egypt, you need brilliant military commanders on the ground. And that introduces a name you are definitely going to recognize.
Section 3. Saladin's rise to power. The student becomes the master. This is honestly one of the most fascinating puzzles in all of medieval political history. You have this powerful, established dynasty. So, how exactly does a general manage to just step out of the chain of command and completely overtake the very empire he was sworn to serve?
The answer is Saladin. Originally, Saladin was just a star general serving directly under Nur-ad-Din. He was the guy on the ground making those expansionist campaigns happen, especially down in Egypt. But Saladin didn't just conquer Egypt for his bosses and quietly step aside. No, he used that newly conquered territory as his own personal power base to found a completely new entity, the Ayyubid Dynasty. The top general had essentially built a rival empire right next door.
Over the next few decades, the geopolitical pressure just skyrockets. In 1181, the Syrian branch of the Zengids is finally reunited with the Iraqi line, but that newly combined state is quickly absorbed into Saladin's rapidly expanding empire. The remaining Zengids, the ones holding down the fort in Al Jazeera, didn't just roll over, though. Saladin actually tried to wipe them out completely by attacking their capital Mosul in 1182. They fought him off, he tried again in 1185, and again they pushed him back. They put up a heck of a defense. But as we all know, winning a couple of sieges does not mean you win the war. The pressure from Saladin was just too overwhelming, and the Zengids were eventually forced to swallow their pride and accept his suzerainty. If you aren't familiar with that term, it basically meant the Zengids could keep running their own internal affairs inside Mosul, but Saladin's Ayyubid Empire completely controlled their foreign policy and international relations. They were stripped of their status as an independent peer empire. They were now just a tributary state answering to their former employee.
Which leads us right into our final chapter. Section 4, The Final Fall, Slaves and Mongols.
Now, what's really wild about the final days of the Zengids is who was actually pulling the strings. We started this explainer looking at this mighty, expansive dynasty, but by the end, true power had fallen to a man named Badr al-Din Lulu. And Badr al-Din was a former slave. He maneuvered his way up to become the regent for the literal last Zengid ruler, a guy named Nasir al-Din Mahmud, who had a super brief reign from 1219 to 1222. The fact that a former slave was essentially running the entire remnants of the dynasty, that tells you everything you need to know about how far Zengid royal authority had decayed.
And that brings us to the year 1222. This is it, the definitive end. When Nasir al-Din Mahmud's short reign wrapped up that year, the former slave, Lulu, didn't bother staying a regent. He took over, and the Zengid family line was officially extinguished. So Lulu drops the regent title and just rules Mosul outright as an Atabek for decades, all the way until 1259. He carved out a pretty solid run for himself from the ashes of his former masters. But let's zoom out to the macro-historical picture for a second. Even his success was just a blip, because soon after his rule ended, the absolutely unstoppable force of the Mongols arrived, Mosul fell, and a century of legacy, architecture, and political structure built by Zengi was just violently, permanently swept away.
So, what does this all mean? We just watched a dynasty build a massive united front, only for the founders' own sons to immediately chop it in half. We watched them elevate a general who eventually subjugated them. And finally, we watched them hollow out from the inside, fall to a former slave, and then get erased entirely by the Mongols. It really begs the question, doesn't it? Does internal division always pave the way for external conquest? It is a pattern we see repeated over and over again throughout history, perfectly captured in this 95-year saga of the Zengids. I really hope this breakdown helped you wrap your head around the crazy dynamics of this era. Keep questioning, keep analyzing, and as always, keep learning.